Let me give you a brief history lesson on how an experimental chip designed by a British company in the 80s became the most popular chipset in the world and is what's powering your phone right now. Founded in 1978, a computer company called Acorn Computers began developing PCs, but they were a little different than the rest. See, in the early days, they kind of did the same thing that everybody else did, including companies like Apple and IBM, where they used the MOS technology 6502 using the MOS instruction set. Instruction sets, by the way, are exactly what they sound like. They're a set of instructions or microcode specifically made for a CPU to run. And yeah, the most popular at the time was the MOS 6502 MOS instruction set because pretty much everybody was using it. But around this time, there was also a little upstart processor company you might have heard of called Intel developing the 8086 running on the x86 architecture, which, if you're using a PC, is probably what it's using right now. Now, the advantage to x86 back then and even today is the fact that it is a complex instruction set architecture. Essentially what that means is that one instruction can run multiple low-level operations at the same time, like load memory, change state, all within one instruction. There are some disadvantages, but we'll talk about those in a minute. Once we start getting into around 1981, Acorn starts experimenting with CPUs using a reduced instruction set. Now, a reduced instruction set running on something like this Sun Microsystems CPU is where a simplified individual instruction is used for each task. So essentially, unlike complex instruction sets where you can have multiple tasks packed into one instruction, you need one instruction per task, which does come with the disadvantage of RISC architecture requiring more code than CISC architecture. However, one of the benefits of RISC architecture is that it is much more power efficient and it can be executed significantly faster. Those advantages are not what you'll find on a complex instruction set CPU. It takes a lot longer to run those multiple tasks within one instruction set, which can also use a lot of power and generate a lot of heat. Not ideal if you're trying to pack a CPU into a small package. But hey, if you're building a big old PC tower, who cares? And so through the 80s, Acorn just kind of kept doing what they were doing, making PCs like the Archimedes running ARM chips, which at the time stood for Acorn RISC Machines. But in the 90s, things changed. Acorn entered a joint venture with a chip fabrication company called VLSI, and they got a $3 million investment from Apple. And the plan here, at least on Apple's side of things, was to use these ARM chips, which now stood for Advanced RISC Machines, in their new PDA called the Newton. Now granted, the Newton was an absolute flop, but it did prove that you could use these ARM chips in small portable packages. After the Newton though, Apple really didn't use ARM chips that much through the 90s after Steve Jobs came back, but they did use the RISC architecture on their PowerPC computers. Apple actually didn't introduce anything run on ARM chips until 2001 with the introduction of the first iPod. And of course, we all know how massive of a success the iPod was. But then 2007 came around and we saw what ARM chips could really do with the introduction of the original iPhone. Funnily enough, Apple actually reached out to Intel for a chip for the iPhone first, and Intel said no. And so ever since then, we've watched this weird computer experiment by a British company back in the 80s become the de facto chipset for smartphones, and even start to get used in things like desktop and laptop computers.